When we go see a doctor, we're often delegating our most important asset and resource, which is our health. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out the way we want it to. So the world that I want to see, the world that I want to live in, the world that I want to create for my son and my grandchildren when I eventually have them, is one where people know how to be healthy their entire life. Could you imagine a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old who knew how to take care of themselves from the very beginning of their life, the trajectory of that person's life versus somebody who didn't, who ends up sick and then learns how to be healthy? Because even if they get healthy, they were still living off their path. They were living off of their path in life, which means they probably didn't accomplish all the things that they wanted to in life, which means they probably also modeled the behaviors that created the illness to their children, to their grandchildren. And now they're delegating and outsourcing that responsibility to somebody else. But if people could know from the very beginning the rules of engagement and know how to take care of themselves, imagine the life that they would create.
Welcome to Healing with the Diamonds podcast. This show features Larry and Kaylin Diamond, along with guests who are passionate about helping families heal together. Through personal stories and powerful conversations, you'll hear real-life experiences and practical tools for reclaiming health. Please note, the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health routine. If you're enjoying Healing with the Diamonds podcast, we'd love your help spreading the word. Leaving a quick review or rating on your favorite podcast platform helps others find us and helps more families start their own healing journey. Thanks so much for listening. Now, here's today's episode.
Hi, everyone. I am Kaylin Diamond.
And I am Larry Diamond.
And we are Healing with the Diamonds.
And it's our great pleasure, our true pleasure, and we know it will be for all our listeners, to bring Sachin Patel. You can correct me if needed, but somebody that I really had a blessed opportunity to meet at a recent conference I was in at Tucson with the amazing Dr. Nasha Winters in her Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health, ordered cohort 9. So I'm going to be a metabolic advocate myself. So we've had Dr. Nasha on. Check out that podcast. Anyone that we know touched by cancer, she is our first resource we send people to. And now, what should I call you? I listen to podcasts, and should I call you Dr. Patel or by your first name?
Well, thank you for asking, and thank you for hosting me. I appreciate this opportunity to connect with both of you, and it was certainly a pleasure to connect with you in person. You can call me Sachin. That would be ideal.
I was blown away with a session you did on breathing, and also by how welcoming and warm you and your wife were. And so I introduced myself and asked if you would come on, and you were sure, let's make it happen. So I really appreciate that. So I have 2 questions to introduce you to our audience. I found out a quote that you say that just blew me away, that the doctor of the future is the patient. And that echoes a quote that I've heard from Lao Tzu: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. When the student is truly ready, the teacher is of no need. The other thing is that you have this remarkable, insightful become proof. I love that because I'm very big into N=1 is true science. It doesn't, there's nuance there, but those things both captivate me. And I want you to talk about both of those. And also a third thing, was it a process? Were you more conventionally oriented, or did you go into chiropractic because you had this holistic learning from nature bent? I'm very curious about that.
So Larry, that's actually a great question. And it helps us kind of unpack, with an understanding of what the actual problem is that we're facing in society right now. I believe that we don't need more doctors, more holistic practitioners, more anything more hospitals, more drugs, more supplements, because in order for those things to be of any benefit, people have to be sick first. And so even if we replaced every single allopathic practitioner with a holistic practitioner, we would still be in the same situation that we're in right now, where people have to get sick before they learn how to be healthy. And so if we look at the cost of that, it costs people years of their lives and eventually thousands and thousands of dollars to course correct, assuming that they even do that. When we go see a doctor, we're often delegating our most important asset and resource, which is our health. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work out the way we want it to. So the world that I want to see, the world that I want to live in, the world that I want to create for my son and my grandchildren when I eventually have them, is one where people know how to be healthy their entire life. Because could you imagine a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old who knew how to take care of themselves from the very beginning of their life, the trajectory of that person's life versus somebody who didn't, who ends up sick and then learns how to be healthy? Because even if they get healthy, they were still living off their, path. They were living off of their path in life, which means they probably didn't accomplish all the things that they wanted to in life, which means they probably also modeled the behaviors that created the illness to their children, to their grandchildren. And now they're delegating and outsourcing that responsibility to somebody else. But if people could know from the very beginning the rules of engagement and know how to take care of themselves, imagine the life that they would create. Imagine the family that they would create and the communities in the world that we could create with that awareness, that self-awareness of, I built myself thanks to my parents, and I have the continuous responsibility and living in the awareness that I will rebuild myself. 90% of our cells replace themselves every 6 months, which means that we are constantly in a state of renewal. But just like buying you a new car doesn't make you a better driver, giving you brand new cells doesn't make you, better at being healthy, right? So people wonder, like, if my cells are replacing themselves constantly, why do I stay sick? And it's because you send them the same message through the same environment and you get the same gene expression or lack of gene expression. You see, when we know how to doctor ourselves, we know what environments to put ourselves in to activate dormant DNA. See, most people, their health is half-baked because their environments are not causing that full expression of their DNA. And so they don't even know all the bells and whistles that are available to them. They don't even have the environment to activate all of their own innate healing capacity. So unfortunately, most people don't know who they are. And because they don't know who they are, they don't know what their true power is and what their level of responsibility is in the healing journey that they're taking themselves through. So that's why the doctor of the future is a patient. And that's why our clinic and, our movement is called the Living Proof Institute, not the I read about it in a book somewhere institute, or I saw it on YouTube institute, right? So we practice what we preach, we live our message, and that's our commitment and our responsibility, not only to ourselves, but to the people that we work with, because we're not going to tell them to do something that we ourselves are not doing as well. And it kind of reminds me of a famous story, and I don't even know if it's actually true. The message is certainly true, but a young mother took a young child to go see Gandhi. And she stood in line for hours and hours and hours, traveled several days to get to this line, and eventually got to the front of the line and said to Gandhi, "Gandhi, my son eats so much candy and sugar and all this junk. Can you please tell him to stop?" And Gandhi looked at her and said, "Certainly, can you come back in 2 weeks?" And so the lady was like, "Oh my God, I have to come all the way back here." So she travels all the way home, travels all the way back, stands in line again, and then says the same thing. "Hey, do you remember me?" And he says, "Of course I do." And he looks over to the son and says, "Son, I want you to stop eating candy and stop eating sugar and stop putting this junk in your body." And he looks at Gandhi with all due respect and says, "Absolutely, I will." So the mother looks to Gandhi and says, "Why didn't you say that 2 weeks ago when we were here?" And it's because he says, 2 weeks ago, I was eating candy. I was eating sugar. I was eating junk. So I can't give that advice to somebody that I'm not doing myself. So that's kind of the embodiment of our movement, and our mission is that we will only encourage people and tell them to do things that we ourselves are doing. And that's where the name Living Proof comes from. So it holds me to a higher standard, which then enables me to hold my clients to a higher standard. And it's not the I'm Perfect Institute, so I'm certainly not perfect. I am a human being just like everyone else. However, I have awareness, right? And when we live in awareness and we understand the ramifications and implications of the choices that we make, then it's a fair battle. But unfortunately, in our health and just in society in general, we're told that certain things are good for us when they may not be, or certain things are okay when they may not be, only later to find out that they're poisoning us. So that's where the living proof model and the become proof model originated from. And then there was a third question that you had, which escapes me.
And by the way, you described me and Kaylin's mission as well. And we can talk about it, but we were up until almost 48 for me. I was that person, misinformed, not taking responsibility, not living in my power. And the universe told me I wasn't going to make 50. And we had just adopted our daughter. I'm 60 now and never healthier. So yeah, so much. Did you have this awareness? So maybe that's why I gave a little backstory of me. So I went into geography actually wanting to seek answers from indigenous wisdom and indigenous people, but I just wasn't applying their profound wisdom to me. But once I did, I started to heal. But did you have a more conventional outlook? Because at one point, we've interviewed Dr. Stephen Hussey, who's also a chiropractor, and he loved his training, but he said some of his training was very conventional. So where did this more insightful, ancestral understanding come from? Was it always there? Was it cultivated? Were there books, mentors? Was it something also always inside of you? Was it parents, aunts, uncles?
Your origin story.
Well, I mean, I'm the forever student, which means I'm learning even in this conversation. I'm learning in every interaction, especially with my son. I'm learning new things, and so I would say that the wisdom is available to all of us, right? If we can slow down, pay attention, be present, then everything we need to know is available to us in any given moment. It's just a matter of being present. So, my original training started off as chiropractic. And I was debating whether I would go in. I didn't know what I wanted to be, still don't know what I want to be. And one of the things that came to me, I was very logical. So I was excelled in math and science, and specifically computer sciences, because you could tell a computer what to do. It was very logical and it would do it, right? There was no emotion involved. It was just all logic. And if you did it right, then you would get an immediate response. And if you did it wrong, you'd get an immediate response as well. And so I was going to go into computer sciences because of that, because I enjoyed the logic of it and the simplicity of it as well, and how you could do complex things with simple instructions. And I love the short feedback loop as well that programming gives you. And then I realized, man, I don't want to sit in front of a computer all day. What else can I do? And I was actually really good with my hands. I guess I still am. And I won the Industrial Arts Award, the woodworking award in my high school. So that was a big passion of mine. So then I'm like, okay, how can I apply this in real life? And so I looked into dentistry. So dentistry is where you're using your hands and tools. And I looked into chiropractic as well because I loved athletics and sports. And I didn't really understand the philosophy of chiropractic at the time. But then when it came time to choose in university, I ended up going into kinesiology. And I got my undergraduate in kinesiology, which is the study of human movement. And that set me up for either dentistry, medical school, chiropractic school. And then I decided to go eventually into chiropractic school because I love the philosophy of looking at the whole body and giving people their power back, right? Every other profession in healthcare takes power away from the client. And I know I'm painting with a broad brush strokes here, but the majority of the time that's true. Whereas chiropractic empowers the patient, right? I don't fix anything as a chiropractor. I remove the things that are interfering with you being able to fix yourself. And so instead of having a God complex, we basically install the God complex back into the client, if you will, and remove the things that are interfering with them. And so 2 years into chiropractic, I was working a lot with athletes, and that resulted in me, more so my company that I was working for, being asked to be on the news. My boss at the time, English was her second language. She was a French-speaking Canadian, and she had frozen on live television prior to that, like just a year ago. And so she wanted nothing to do with being on the news. And so she said, Patel, you go do it. I said, okay. So that landed me on the evening news, and they did a great cover story. And we had a ton of people call the office. And guess what? None of them had elbow pain, which is what the story was about. We were helping people with, musculoskeletal issues, repetitive strain injuries. And the story they ran was on a lady named Connie. And we helped her with her elbow pain after surgeries and physiotherapy and things like that failed. And all these people started calling the office after the story aired, and none of them had any type of pain. Didn't have physical pain. They had more dysfunction in their body. So we had people coming in with Lyme disease and autoimmune diseases and, chronic fatigue and just debilitating health conditions that nobody could help them with. And that's when I realized that the skills and the training that I had wasn't enough to help these people. And when you don't know where to refer somebody, that's also very gutting. So it's one thing if I can't help somebody, but I can refer them to somebody who can. But these people had seen every other practitioner. They had seen every other specialist, and nobody was able to help them. And that's when I learned about functional medicine. And learning about functional medicine helped me see the invisible. It made the invisible visible. So as a chiropractor, very hands-on, we do great physical exams. We do great physical therapies and treatments and interventions. But if I can't touch it and I can't see it, then I can't fix it. So functional medicine gave me the capacity to kind of see the invisible and document it at a cellular level so we could see how to improve function with people. And just like anything, functional medicine can get complicated very quickly, and it did. And so I started studying ancient wisdom to figure out, okay, how do I simplify this process? And I came across a quote from Leonardo da Vinci, and he says that the ultimate sophistication is simplicity. And so I took that, and I always run extremes, which means that, okay, well, what's the most complicated thing that we know about? It's the human body. So therefore, it must be simple to take care of it. Instead of matching its complexity, we should identify what are the simple inputs that we can, provide the body with so it can take care of the complex tasks, right? Like my computer. I don't know how my computer works, but it's simple. I just type and things happen. I don't know how my car works, right? Like all the nuances of it. And to drive it, I don't have to know how the engine works and how all the components work. I just know if I press the gas, it goes. If I press the brakes, it stops. And if I steer, then it goes in the direction I want it to. So what if our body could be that simple? What if being healthy could be as simple as driving once I know the rules of the road? Once I know what all the buttons on my car do, once I know what the other rules that everyone else is obeying on the road should be, once I know how to read the weather conditions and the terrain, I should be able to drive my whole life and potentially not get into a car accident, right? And if I do, then the mechanic and the body shop and the people are there to fix me. But ultimately, I started applying that principle to wellness, to, our practice, and simplified it. And so I decided to basically apply Da Vinci's principles into my practice. And what are the simple inputs that create a complex cascade internally that I don't have to think about or worry about, but I know are going to create a predictable outcome every single time? And so that's what we anchored our practice into. And it evolved into that over many years. But now we just keep things embarrassingly simple so that people can achieve health. And then that quest for searching for the zenith of sophistication and simplicity led me to the breath, because there's nothing simpler to do than breathe correctly, and there's nothing more sophisticated to do than to breathe correctly, because it gives us a direct access point to so many systems in our body by simply changing the way we breathe. So that's where I'm at now.
And, when you were talking about simplicity, one of the things that Larry shares a lot is that one of the reasons we got healthy was because we're really lazy. So, and one of the easiest things to do was just start eating simply, right? just
Food that worked for our body.
right. And
And
we
at
didn't
meal times.
right. We didn't calorie count. We didn't do our macros and stuff. We just went with what he had read and the research, what are we going to take out and how does that make us feel? Oh, wow. When I take that out, I feel a lot better. I'm going to continue doing that. And then I'm just going to eat that way in meal times. And slowly we got to the point where we were feeling so much better. We were able to do other simple things like move and other life
Fasting
choices.
longer.
Right.
But we called it, honestly, I didn't know the word fasting. I called it not eating because I wasn't hungry, which is about as simple as you can get. And I had the good fortune to work for Megan Ramos and Dr. Jason Fung as a fasting coach from 6 years. And really what we were doing when you break it down, and I would even tell clients this, eating whole real food that you enjoy, truly enjoy, because food enjoyment of whole real food is important, and that food works for your body, and eating it at meal times. And that is, it doesn't get simpler than that. And I consider him my sensei. Bruce Lee has wonderful quotes about simplicity, that halfway cultivation is extravagance. True cultivation is simplicity. So let's talk breathing. You want to ask? Yeah.
And I, our ethos at Healing with the Diamonds is being able to show families, because we got healthy as a family unit. Larry started his journey. I started cottoning on about 8 months later, figured out, wow, he was doing these things and getting much healthier in a very simple way. And then that transferred to our daughter, who was a toddler at the time. And
your mom.
And my mom. But so our simplicity, where we started, was nutrition. I like the idea that you talk about breathing. It's one of the most basic things we do. And I think there's this misunderstanding that it takes a lot of resources to get healthy. It takes a lot of money to get healthy. And we found all this information just from him doing the research and reading into it. And we want to let families know that you can do this as a family with little to no resources. You just have to have the information. So I'm really excited to hear more about how families can take what you've learned about breathing, how to breathe and so forth, and then transfer it to their family so they can improve their health just with those practices.
And I heard you talk about 12-second breaths and, maybe starting with the techniques that even K to 12 kids or our kids can master.
Yeah, absolutely. Breathing is something that we do unconsciously, anywhere from 23,000 to 60,000 times a day, depending on how old we are. So younger children and newborns breathe more than adults do. We consume more air in a day than food in a week. If you're fasting, you're consuming even less, obviously. But, you consume about 30 pounds of air every day. And so your interaction with the outside world is actually quite profound through our breath. The purpose of breathing is to do two things, and many things really, but the two main things that we associate it with is delivering oxygen to our tissues and removing CO2. However, without breathing, we can't talk. Without breathing, we can't yell. Without breathing, we can't cry. Without breathing, we can't laugh. Without breathing, we can't smell. Without breathing, we can barely taste our food. So breath is involved in so many other areas of our health that we don't necessarily associate it with. The breath is the fastest adaptogen in our body. And in fact, when our state of physiology changes, the first outward change that takes place is a change in our respiratory rate and the way we breathe. So for example, if a lion were to walk into my office, I would immediately gasp, which would cause my lungs to expand. My heart would get squeezed. It would instantly increase blood pressure. And now I'd have blood going to my arms and legs so I can run away from whatever is chasing me. My respiratory rate would increase so that I could deliver more oxygen to my tissue. And because my respiratory rate increases, my blood pressure is going to increase as well because my lungs are rapidly expanding, contracting. My diaphragm is rapidly moving up and down. So it's creating an immediate change in my physiology. Now, if I were to feel a sense of relief, I would sigh, right? Sighing extends the exhale, but also tells my nervous system that I'm safe. Or it's a way for us to create safety in our bodies. And so what I tell people, and the practitioners that I coach and the clients that I train, is paying attention to the way not only you're breathing, but the people around you are breathing will give you a direct insight into the state of their nervous system. And so that can help us determine how to help or support that person if they need it. And so breath is really, really quite powerful in the sense that it's available to us, it's invisible, and literally the answer to many of our challenges are right under our noses. When it comes to breathing as a child, as parents, one of the things that we want to do is we want to pay attention to how our child is breathing, because paying attention to how they're breathing will determine the shape of their face. It will determine the state of their nervous system. So, for example, a common problem that parents might be facing this day and age is overcrowding of the teeth. So my son actually had this issue, and he also had cavities, despite the fact that he ate healthy and didn't eat junk food. And because the way we breathe actually changes our oral microbiome, and it changes the shape of our face. So first things first, for adults and for children, especially if you have young children, as a parent, you want to pay attention to not if your child is breathing, but how your child is breathing, because that'll tell you the state of their nervous system. It'll also tell you if anatomically their facial structure will form correctly. So let me give you a quick example. How should we breathe, right? That's a question that comes up. So for the most part, unless we're talking or unless we're breathing through our mouth for a particular reason, our tongue should be gently rested in the roof of our mouth. So pretend you're saying the letter N or the sound that letter N makes, N. That's where you want your tongue. The tip of your tongue should be right behind your front two teeth and laid across the top of your mouth. Now, some children and some adults can't do this because they have a tongue tie. A tongue tie, that little frenulum at the bottom of your tongue. And if that tongue tie or that frenulum is thick and prominent, then your tongue can't rest gently in the roof of your mouth. Now, what happens is, imagine this is my upper dental arch, and if my tongue is sitting in the roof of my mouth, it's going to spread my arch out. But if it's not, my arch collapses inward. So now we end up with a narrow face and a small dental arch. So then it doesn't allow our facial structure to form correctly. The roof of our mouth, our hard palate, is the floor of our sinus cavity, which means that if we have a narrow upper palate, then we have small sinuses, which makes it difficult for us to breathe through our nose, which then people become habitual mouth breathers as a result of that. When somebody's a habitual mouth breather, they end up with overcrowding of the teeth. They also end up with a disrupted oral microbiome, and they stay in a chronically low-grade fight or flight state. So now they're leaning towards being more sympathetic dominant instead of being balanced or more parasympathetic dominant. So it changes their emotional state, changes their oral microbiome. We have about 700 different types of bacteria in our mouth. And so when we breathe through our mouth, we're then, disrupting the lung microbiome and causing stress on the immune system, versus breathing through our nose. When your tongue is positioned correctly in the roof of your mouth and you're breathing nice and slow, let's call it 4 to 6 seconds in, 4 to 6 seconds out, you're slowing down the air, right? You're spinning the air, you're pressurizing the air, you're mechanically cleansing the air with your nose hairs and the mucus in the nose, and you're biologically sterilizing the air because of nitric oxide production that happens from the bacteria on the tongue, and they travel into the sinus cavity to kill viruses and bacteria on contact before they go into our lungs. When we breathe through our nose, we temperature regulate the air, we moisture regulate the air, we recapture the moisture that we're breathing out so we don't become as dehydrated, and we promote a healthy oral microbiome, and we shift into a more parasympathetic state. So paying attention to how a child is breathing, whether they're breathing through their mouth or their nose, is number one. Number two is their tongue correctly positioned in the roof of their mouth? Okay. And then if you want to get a little bit more advanced, is the pace at which they're breathing. So speeding up the respiratory rate will increase sympathetics and sympathetic dominance. Slowing down, especially lengthening the exhale, will shift people into a more parasympathetic state. So the breath is essentially the steering wheel to the nervous system. The immune system starts in the nose, so how we breathe also influences our nervous system. The way we taste is also determined by our breath. Remember that about 70% of our taste comes from our olfactory nerve, which is in our nose. So that's why when people don't want to taste something, they plug their nose. And when people breathe through their mouth, it takes more sugar for them to taste sweetness. So it can actually change their dietary preferences. So they need to actually have more sugar to taste the same level of sweetness as somebody who is not a mouth breather.
That's revolutionary right there.
Neither of us had heard that.
Wow.
We heard about mouth breathing, but not that. Wow. And the 30 pounds I was unaware of, and those are really helpful to.
Yeah. And then for people who are, looking to lose weight, for example, for every 10 pounds we lose, 8.4 is through the lungs, because the byproduct of cellular respiration is CO2 and water. So we breathe out the CO2. Some of the moisture we actually breathe out as well. That's how you can fog a mirror. And then some of it, obviously, we urinate or sweat out. But the majority of weight loss actually occurs through the lungs. And so it's kind of important from a metabolic standpoint that we have A, direct access to our nervous system, and B, we understand how to modulate our breath. See, breathing is both an art and a science, right? Scientific in the sense that it can create a predictable outcome in every single human being every single time. So every single time I have you increase your respiratory rate or breathe a certain way, it's going to increase your heart rate. It's going to increase your sympathetic dominance. It's going to change you into a more, into a survival state. And every time I do the opposite, I slow down your breath, put your tongue in the roof of the mouth, breathe in and out through your nose, 4 to 6 seconds in, 4 to 6 seconds out. 100% of the time, in 100% of humans, it's going to create the same effect. It's going to shift you and drive you into a more parasympathetic state. So that's the science, right? And there's thousands of studies that have been done on breathing, billions of years of humans using breath as a modality in the East, right? So in Chinese medicine, in Ayurvedic medicine, the yogis, the sages, they've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. In fact, in India, breathing and pranayama, prana is life force, yama is control. So breath work is what it loosely translates to, is controlling our life force. And so think about this for a minute. When we stop breathing, the first thing we lose is consciousness. So we can also describe breath as our consciousness, right? Your heart's still working, your brain's still working, your organs are still working. So you're not dead, but you lose consciousness. So our breath is truly our life force. And if we can understand how to utilize and leverage that life force, then we become a force of nature, right? In a good way, in a very positive way. Breath is also art, because I can change the way you breathe, right? I can change the pace at which you breathe. I can have you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. I can change the nostril through which you breathe. I can have you hold your breath. I can change the cadence at which you breathe. I can have you hold on full, hold on empty. So there's a variety of different ways that you can breathe to elicit a variety of different responses. I can change the way you breathe to raise your body temperature. I can change the way you breathe to cool down your body temperature. I can change the way you breathe to increase blood flow to certain parts of the brain. I can increase blood flow to your organs as well. Depending on what I want to do, there's a breath for every single thing that you do. And the way I know this is, it's science, but the way we also know this is that if we just pay attention to the way somebody's breath changes when their state changes, we already know that the body is using the breath, right? Because the breath is a physical shift. It creates a physical response in the body. When I change your cortisol levels, that doesn't create a physical shift. It creates a chemical shift in the body. But when I change your breath, it creates a physical shift. So for example, if I increase respiratory rate, just going back to that example, then my lungs are going to start pumping and squeezing my heart. My heart has no choice but to increase pressure and increase its heart rate, right? As I breathe in and out, my diaphragm, as it moves up and down, it's going to start pumping my lymphatic system. Some of the biggest lymph nodes are underneath your diaphragm. So it makes sense that God put them there. Where else would God put them, because you're going to breathe 23,000 times a day. If you breathe correctly, you're going to pump that lymphatic system. And we know that a lot of cancers and diseases start with poor lymphatics, which means that it actually starts with poor breathing. So getting people to do better lymph drainage is great, but what if we got them to breathe better? Then they would automatically activate their own lymphatic pump. The other thing the diaphragm does is it acts as the second heart. So it's referred to as in Chinese medicine as the second heart. So about 40% of the pressure that the heart creates to pump blood is happening because of the lungs and the diaphragm. So we can't directly control our heart rate by controlling our heart, but we can indirectly control our heart rate by controlling our breath. So that's our direct access point to that system. The third thing that the diaphragm does is it acts as the master conduit for the myofascial system. So the myofascial system is like a spider web. If you ever see a beautiful spider web, you'll see there's always a center to the spider web, right? Right in the middle. And so we have the spider web that goes through our entire body. And so it only makes sense that the conduit of that system is in the middle, right? We wouldn't put it up here. We wouldn't put it in our toes. We'd put it right in the middle of our body. That's where our diaphragm is. And so our diaphragm acts as a force distribution system that distributes the force through the myofascial system. And this is why when we experience something traumatic, the first thing that changes is our breath. If somebody's going to hit you, right, the first thing you do is you tighten your diaphragm because that's going to distribute the force throughout the entire body. The other thing that happens in the myofascial system, it's our emotional hard drive. So this is where a lot of our emotional pain is stored. And therefore, when we don't cry, when we don't express our emotions, when we don't scream when we want to, well, guess what? That emotion gets suppressed and buried into the myofascial system, and therefore it later on shows up as cancer, as pain, as disease, as dysfunction. And it's just an emotional signature that we need to start working on. So this is why breath work is like taking that cobweb and plucking it, right? And just giving it a good shake so that all that emotion now starts boiling to the surface. See, the way we suppress emotions is we stop breathing, right? So if somebody wants to cry, the only way to stop crying is to stop breathing first. And the only way to stop breathing is to stop your diaphragm from moving. So now that pain, that emotion gets buried into the myofascial system and pokes its head up years down the road at some point. But what also happens, in order to stop our diaphragm from moving, we have to tighten it, right? We have to hold on to it. And what that does is it develops trigger points. So people who've had traumatic experiences, people who've been bullied, people who've been in, physical altercations, whatever the case may be, or people who have had their emotions suppressed, their diaphragm now develops trigger points. And as a result of those trigger points, the diaphragm doesn't move through its full range of motion. And so now the breath becomes short and shallow. So their default state of breathing becomes short, shallow, which means the default state of their nervous system becomes sympathetic dominant. So no healing takes place in the sympathetic state, right? We survive in that state, but we're not in our full healing capacity unless we get into that more parasympathetic or that ventral vagal state that we talk about. And so you could give somebody all the supplements you want. You can give them the best lab testing, the best food, the best everything. But if they're sympathetic dominant, they're never going to fully utilize those things that we're giving them. And so the breath is the steering wheel to the nervous system, which means that if I change the way somebody breathes, I can change their sympathetic dominant nervous system into a more parasympathetic and balanced nervous system, and I can improve their digestion, I can improve their lymphatic function, I can improve their emotional clearing, I can improve their heart health, I can improve their immune health, I can improve their oral health. I mean, it's just like one thing that when you know how to do it, automatically creates a cascade effect throughout your entire body. So that's why I call it the zenith of simplicity and sophistication, right?
Yeah.
I can teach really simple yet sophisticated breathing techniques to somebody. And what's cool about it is that it has a pleomorphic effect throughout their entire body. And so my new favorite line is that how can we expect people to know how to live if they don't even know how to breathe? Most people have never been taught how to breathe. And, I didn't know how to breathe until I was about 42. I'm 47 now, and it's been the greatest gift that I've given myself. And, it's the greatest gift that I can offer somebody else because it immediately creates a shift. I don't have to ship them anything. They don't have to buy anything. There's no side effects. There's no, it doesn't matter if I'm teaching them across borders. There's no legal ramifications, right? And there's thousands and thousands of years of actual utilization, and there's thousands of papers that have been published about breathing. So it's like one of the most evidence-based interventions that we can possibly offer people, and it's embarrassingly simple and embarrassingly free as well. So that's kind of
That's
in a
amazing.
nutshell. I mean, those are just some of the things that we can talk about, but I hope that gives people a little bit of an insight into why I'm so excited about breathing
No,
and how it can be
so
helpful.
I am super excited. Like I just have so many ideas going off in my head. Like Larry said, I'm an elementary school teacher, and I
They're perfectly regulated.
and I don't know a lot about the education system in Canada, but we have experienced, as like the whole system has experienced, a lot of trauma, especially since COVID. And
Hmm.
many populations are seeing kids who are just in constant states of dysregulation, to the point that we see teacher retention. We can't retain teachers because they have been taught to teach kids, not to regulate kids, right? And
Mm.
we find ourselves doing so much social emotional learning and parenting, and then not being able to get to the teaching. And when I hear you talking about being able to use simple breath work to possibly help those, these like populations of kids be able to regulate themselves so they can get to a state where they're open to learning. I'm just super excited. Like I want to take this podcast after it's done and like send it to my principal, because I'm like, we need some type of breathing as a campus. So speaking of that, have you worked with in the education system, or if you haven't, do you have any, where to start looking on how to bring that to like larger population?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, for me, my focus has been mainly educating practitioners, and I'm always open to, wherever I'm welcome, I'll always step through the door, right? And I think with children, it's particularly important because if we can get them to learn how to breathe at a very young age and get them to self-regulate at a very young age, then they're in the driver's seat. You see, like, it's not the children's fault that they don't know this, right? I mean, in fact, when we had COVID, we had this major respiratory infection going around, and no one was talking about breathing. I mean, I was, but even in our functional medicine profession, how many times have you had anyone come on the stage and talk about breathing and breath? Right, almost zero. So when I started learning this information, I took my functional medicine background, my chiropractic background, and I used to teach head and neck anatomy. So I'm very familiar with dissecting the human head and kind of seeing all the amazing things that are happening inside of us. And I took my dad hat and put that on too, because it changes the way our child's face is shaped, which is so, so important, and changes again, the oral health, the lung health, and of course, the health and state of the nervous system. So I feel like this should be part of all curriculum. I mean, it's not even part of the medical curriculum. I have, when I do my keynotes on breathing, the pulmonologists come running up to me first because they spend their whole life, entire life on breathing, and they don't know any of this stuff.
Wow.
Right? Because they don't understand the implications of proper breathing. They're just looking at it from the lung perspective, and they're not looking at it from the emotional perspective, the oral health perspective, the lymphatic perspective, the myofascial perspective. So, I'm trying to bring more awareness around this topic in as many places as I can. And, through this process, I've become really good friends with James Nestor and have spent quite a bit of time with him. And, we just need more people doing this. I mean, it's part of the curriculum in many other countries. Like in India, it's part of the curriculum. So they start every day with pranayama.
We're
You could
going to
start,
India.
you could start every class, right, with teaching children how to breathe. It's just simple practices. I mean, again, it's embarrassingly simple. Once you know how to do it, unless you get hit in the head and forget everything you learned, it's a tool that's available to you. In fact, I have a guide that I'm happy to share. It's called Breathe Like This, Not That. And it teaches you how to breath is circumstantial. So when people ask me, well, what's the best way to breathe? Well, that's like asking what's the best way to drive, right? It's like impossible to answer. The best way to drive is according to the road in front of you. So the best way to breathe is according to the circumstances that you're in. So if you're trying to study, there's a way to breathe. If you're going for a walk, there's a way to breathe. If you're trying to fall asleep, there's a way to breathe. If you're trying to lift weights, there's a way to breathe, right? So the way the breath is like the steering wheel to the nervous system. And if we just view it as that, it becomes really easy. If the road turns ahead, I turn my steering wheel, right, to match the road. Now, if I don't, I can bounce off the curb and I'll probably make it, in the direction I want to go in, but it's going to be messy. Think of a bowling ball, right? And if you've ever gone bowling and you have the gutters on either side, right? So I can throw the ball down and not pay attention to what's happening, and it'll eventually make its way to the end of the bowling alley. It might end up in the gutter or I might knock down a few pins. But if I were to pay attention to, the way I'm bowling that ball and, bowl it right down the middle or add a spin to it, then I'm going to get a strike, or at least I'm going to knock down more of the pins and I'm not going to end up in the gutter. So most people's breathing, because they're breathing without awareness, is in the gutter. So they just kind of get bounced around by life. Right? Their nervous system just bounces around through life, and that may not be what they want. But if they could control their breath, then just like they're staying in the middle of their lane when they're driving or in the middle of the lane when they're bowling, they're able to get much better outcomes in everything that they do. So your breath is your greatest ally. And if we could teach parents this, if we could teach teachers this, if we could teach administrators this, it doesn't take long to create measurable results. So it's not like, it's going to take months for you to see a difference. You'll notice a difference within the first time that you teach people how to breathe. When we take people through our breathing transformations, within 60 minutes, they're like a different human being because of the transformation they experienced. And because breath is your fastest and most potent adaptogen, your body's already been using it without your awareness, right? So when children cry, I look at it as breath work. When children scream, I look at it as breath work. When children laugh, I look at it as breath work. So we just have to start viewing, this expression, this way of expressing ourselves through a slightly different lens, right? And when we do that, then we can control that expression, or we can regulate it so that it comes out the way we want it to. So for a lot of kids, just think about it this way. We don't know what's going on with them or what traumas they've experienced or what they've been through in life and what they're going through at home. So if their diaphragm is full of trigger points, their breathing is short and shallow, they're breathing through their mouth instead of through their nose, I expect that child to have dysfunctional behavior. I expect that child not to be able to focus. In fact, if I wanted you not to be able to focus, that's exactly what I'd have you do. I'd have you breathe short and shallow and breathe through your mouth. And you'd feel terrible, you'd feel exhausted, and you wouldn't be able to concentrate and focus. So your nervous system is not lined up with the task at hand, right? So if we were to align your breath, which then regulates your nervous system with the task at hand, we call that concept autonomic pairing. Is your nervous system paired with the task that you're trying to accomplish? Another example would be, digestion, right? So if somebody eats while they're stressed out, their nervous system is in fight or flight while they're trying to perform a rest and digest activity. So they'll never digest their food properly because their nervous system doesn't have a fighting chance. Their body doesn't have a fighting chance because they're wanting to go forward, but their transmission's in reverse, right? No matter how good they steer, no matter how good they are at driving, if the transmission's in the wrong position, you're going to go in the wrong direction. So what we help people do is, and what children can do, right? Because when they're exercising or when they're playing outside, they're going to breathe a different way. When they're trying to focus, they're going to breathe a different way, right? And we have to, create a safe space where children can express themselves, because their home might not be a safe space to express themselves, right? They may have been told, like I said, when you tell a child to stop crying, which every child has been told, the only way to stop crying is to stop breathing. And so your nervous system thinks you're trying to kill it, right? So when we start thinking about that, just think of these poor children. They have no idea that this is happening to them, and they don't have the tools to recover from it. So where we start is by doing some diaphragm trigger point release, right? And so just getting under the rib cage with your fingers hooked like this usually works better if you're laying on your back. And you start getting people to start massaging just inside their rib cage on their diaphragm. And it's not uncommon for people to have emotional releases doing that, because our diaphragm is where our diaphragm is where we store our trauma and our grief. Well, trauma in our diaphragm, grief in our lungs, emotions in our myofascial system, and they're all connected to each other. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, I think this would be a very, very powerful intervention and modality. And the younger we start, the better, because also keep in mind, as we talked about earlier, it also affects their facial structure. Right. So my son, when he went to the dentist for the first time, he had a ton of cavities, and we're like, what the heck? We felt like failures as parents, but the good news was those were his baby teeth. And then we went to fast forward, we went to the dentist a few years later, and they're like, Mr. Patel, we have some good news and bad news. And I said, well, what's the bad news? And they said, well, your son doesn't have enough space for his adult teeth to grow in. And I'm like, what's the good news? And the good news is we can remove some of his adult teeth, so there's room for it to grow in. And thank God I'm a chiropractor and have the philosophy that God don't make no junk. And there's no such thing as too many teeth. There's too little jaw. And so what we realized in that moment was that, and through James Nestor's book, is that he was a habitual mouth breather. So he had some behavioral challenges. He was a good kid, but, just his behavior would be off sometimes. He drooled on his pillow at night, right? He had the cavities. Mouth breathing is the number one cause of cavities. And so he had all the signs, but we didn't know, right? So you just don't know what you don't know. And you would think that, okay, well, if you've got cavities, you got to keep brushing your teeth more. But it has nothing to do with brushing your teeth, right? It has to do with how you breathe. Or you might think, oh, you got to change your diet. And of course, those things are important, but that's not what's causing the problem. So when we got down to the root of it, we realized that as a habitual mouth breather, that his tongue wasn't positioned correctly. His face was collapsing inwards. He had some challenges with his nose. He couldn't breathe through his nose properly. So we went to 4 dentists, and all of them told us to pull teeth. And again, thank God, my wife and I were convicted that wasn't the solution. So we had a palatal expander put in. He's got a beautiful, broad smile. He can breathe through his nose. He's been mouth taping for the last 5 years, not a single cavity in his mouth. And so all that was corrected because of the way we changed his breath, and we saw the right people to support us.
Can you repeat that expander term again for other parents if they're curious?
So you'd want to see like an airway focused dentist, and your typical dentist may not be focused on the airway. They might just be focused on the teeth. And so an airway focused dentist doesn't just look at, do you have a bright smile and no cavities? They look at what is the structure of your palate, because your upper palate forms the floor of your sinuses. So you'd want to see an airway-focused dentist. You can go to askthedentist.com, and you can find somebody who's certified at looking at the mouth that way. So we actually had to drive about an hour from where we live to find somebody that we connected with who did that type of work. And so there are different types of palatal expanders, and the dentist would know which one is most appropriate for the child. But yeah, like even wisdom teeth, like nobody needs to have their wisdom teeth pulled. Like, and if you do, that's okay. I understand. I had mine pulled because I didn't know any better. And, I long before I knew any of this stuff. But, God doesn't make us with too many body parts, right? So that's usually not the case. It's usually that we are not growing into our bodies, right? And if you look at the average person's jaw, it's smaller than it used to be because we don't eat hard foods anymore. So, stimulating the jaw by, children these days, most of their food is ultra processed, which means it's already chewed for them. So there's nothing to chew. It just turns to mush after a few bites, or it's pureed. So there's no stimulation of the jaw. Even a child, when you give a child a toothbrush for the first time, what do? They don't brush their teeth. They've watched you brush your teeth for their entire life. So you would think that from a, neural, mirroring, they would actually just start brushing their teeth automatically. But what do? They bite it.
They bite
right?
it.
They start chewing it. And so intuitively, this is an interesting story. I'll share this because I think parents might find it fascinating. You might find it fascinating. is my parents grew up in India, and all my parents' side of their families, they all grew up in India. They all have perfect teeth, no braces, beautiful arches, no cavities, no dentists, no orthodontists their entire life. So they didn't even know what a dentist was until they moved to Canada. And so I'm like, this is interesting, right? When you start thinking about that, like, how is that possible? And so when they were growing up, they didn't even use toothbrushes. They would chew on a neem branch. So they would chew on the branch, which would stimulate their jaw, right? Would get saliva production to increase because chewing increases saliva. Brushing doesn't increase saliva, chewing does. And they would bristlate the end of that stick and then kind of brush their teeth with it. So now they have a healthy oral microbiome. They've stimulated their jaw. They've strengthened their teeth, right? And they have a full dental arch because they've learned how to breathe. It's part of their curriculum in school. So, if you think about it, like, we're setting our kids up for failure as adults.
Yep.
From a nervous system standpoint, from an oral health standpoint, from a self-awareness standpoint, right? From an immune system standpoint, from a lymphatic standpoint, right? Like, all of these things are directly implicated when we learn how to breathe. And so, the direct access point to our nervous system is the breath. And, you're only as healthy as your nervous system at the end of the day.
Well, if you ever get to Central Texas, you have an invite into the school system, hopefully.
I'm starting before that. No, first of all, I'm not only going to my principal, I'm going to our physical education teachers, because I was thinking of the best place to introduce this right away. Like, where could we put it right into the curriculum? And I think in our physical education classes, I mean, I teach elementary school, so all kids, go through those classes. Just a couple of the things that you said. So our daughter is diagnosed with ADHD. And one of the things that she does, she likes to chew on things. And so chewing gum, just like, I'm like, get that out of your mouth. But now that's making so much more sense that that's something that her body is telling her she needs to do to stimulate all of that. I'm curious, how old was your son when he started mouth taping, and how did
he mouth tape?
Yeah, he said that.
We've been mouth taping ever since we read James's book. And
Okay, wonderful.
But our daughter, we weren't going to force it on her. And
so I'm just curious about that experience.
Yeah, so my son started mouth taping about 5 years ago now. And my whole family's been mouth taping every night for 5 years. It's like our nightly ritual. He comes to me, even at 15, he can rip his own tape, but he's like, Dad, can you rip me mouth tape? And so he does that. And, there's, so mouth taping is probably the cheapest, most effective intervention when it comes to health possible. One thing that it does, dysfunctional nighttime breathing has been closely linked to ADD and ADHD. In fact, some studies say anywhere from 30 to 100% of people who have ADHD have some form of dysfunctional breathing. So that's like the first place that I would look, because, I can give somebody ADD if I make them breathe dysfunctionally. 100% of children or adults will have ADD. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. Mouth taping ensures that we're breathing through our nose, ensures we're increasing nitric oxide, ensures that we're not breathing through our mouth so that we're not drying out our mouth. Mouth breathing is a diuretic, so it causes people to wake up in the middle of the night to use a bathroom. And so there's a whole cascade of things that it does. And so I always ask people, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And some people feel more tired when they wake up in the morning than when they went to bed. And so that doesn't make sense, right? And a lot of it has to do with how they're breathing while they sleep. Another thing that people might see if their breathing is dysfunctional is they might see that they wake up with their blood sugar being high first thing in the morning because their body was running a marathon while they were sleeping because they were breathing dysfunctionally. So I would say that mouth taping is, it's very cheap. All you need is a piece of 3M micropore tape. You just place it vertically like this. For young children, you can use something called myotape, which is Patrick McEwen's creation, and it goes around the mouth. So if parents don't feel comfortable having their children cover their mouth, you're not sealing it, but you're just like taping it shut, then they can use the myotape. So that way If they need to, they can open their mouth without any issues, but when their jaw is relaxed, their mouth is going to be closed. And this could also be a great way to train their children during the day, right? Just put that tape on when they come home, and it will train them when they're watching TV or reading a book or playing video games or, all the cool things kids do. Then their mouth will naturally go into that closed position. Tongue will be at the roof of the mouth. They'll be breathing in and out through their nose. So those are some things that can be helpful for people.
I'm so excited. Like so our daughter is 15 as well. And when we first started talking to her about that, she's like, no, she does not want to hear anything about it. But I think she's gotten to that point where if we can introduce that this could help with other situations, like with the focus, with the ADHD tendencies, with some of the other things she's experiencing.
And maybe if she heard it from you instead of us.
And that your son does it, and he's 15, and it's okay.
Yeah, that usually helps, right? When it's not your parents telling you what to do. The other thing magical. That she might want to consider. So it's really, it's not about the mouth taping. It's really about the nasal breathing, right? So the mouth tape is one way to get there. You can also, if she doesn't like the idea of taping her mouth, because sometimes for some people that could be a little traumatic, right? Or if they've been through a traumatic situation where somebody tried to cover their mouth to stop them from screaming or yelling or crying or asking for help, then that could induce some trauma. So you can have her wear it during the day for 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe take a nap with it so she gets comfortable with it. The other option would be to get a chin strap. So that's a strap that, kind of goes over the head and underneath the chin to keep the mouth closed. So there are other ways to ensure that she's nasal breathing, but I would have her pay attention to how she's breathing during the day. Symptoms of mouth breathing, one of the main symptoms is a dry mouth. So if she has a dry mouth, that could be why she's chewing gum. Halitosis, bad breath, can be caused when the mouth is dry. Frequent urination, because mouth breathing is a diuretic. Feeling thirsty all the time could be another thing. Cavities could be another issue that people present with more long-term if they're mouth breathing. And then just low-grade anxiety for no reason. Those are common signs of mouth breathing. And then, it does change the shape of somebody's face. And so you can go online and you can find pictures of, what a mouth breather's face looks like versus a non-mouth breather. Because a mouth breather will be physically and, at a subconscious level, less attractive to the opposite sex versus somebody who has like a well-developed jaw.
And I'm sure you're a big fan of Weston Price and a dentist.
Mm-hmm.
And I love James's term of, rather than pulmonologist, but a pulmonaut, like explorers. You are both pulmonauts for sure. I've done a lot of slow breathing. Me and my wife have done some Wim Hof. And I had heard of pranayama in the alternate nostrils, but for some reason I haven't done pranayama yet. And so I was planning to with this, but knowing that I've heard, miraculous things about pranayama, and that's amazing that it's part of the curriculum in India. I don't know if you can do a quick session of that. We do upload this to YouTube as well, or if you have YouTube videos like James Nestor does and Perry Nicholson does on, great lymphatic, look up the big six, everyone, in addition to breathing. So we do the big six, but we're now going to do breathing. And you mentioned before sleep, and you mentioned that there's a breath for lowering body temperature. So is that the one before sleep? And now I've asked two things. I've asked pranayama and before, but I'm being selfish. Those are two things that I want to know about.
I'm happy to share. So pranayama means breath control, right? So controlling the life force. So any breath work is pranayama. So mouth taping, in my opinion, is pranayama. Slow breathing is pranayama. Hyperventilating is pranayama because you're consciously controlling your breath, okay? And so a few different techniques that I recommend to people. One is coherence breathing. So this is what I would refer to as your normal state of breath. Tongue at the roof of the mouth, gently laid across the roof. Jaw in a relaxed position. breathing in and out through the nose for a count of anywhere from 4 to 6. And what we want to feel when we're breathing this way is a little bit of air hunger. So it might feel like we're not breathing enough. That's how you know you're doing it correctly. What happens when you breathe slowly is you increase CO2 levels. When you increase CO2 levels, it actually delivers more oxygen to the tissue. So when you slow down your breath, when you're checking emails, reading a book, right, even as you're listening to me speak, then we want to go to a 4 to 6 seconds in, 4 to 6 seconds out. We call that coherence breathing. Coherence breathing connects our heart and our brain. So that's why we call it that, but it also increases tissue oxygenation. So that's my default state of breathing. Whenever I bring awareness to my breath, I'm going into coherence, assuming I'm sitting or, reading a book or watching TV. I'm aligning my breath with that task. That's how I would breathe most of the day. The second breath I want to share with you is the 4-7-8 breath. We attribute these, Andrew Weil, quoted this breath, if you will, or named it, but who does it really belong to, right? I'm sure somebody else probably named it over the thousands of years we've been around as humans. So 4-7-8 breath is a great way to help you fall asleep. So you breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 7, and then exhale for a count of 8. So essentially what we're doing is we're lengthening the exhale, which is shifting us into a more parasympathetic state. Okay, so 4 seconds in, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale. And we could call it the Patel breath if I just change it to 4 seconds in, 8 seconds hold, 8 seconds exhale, right? It doesn't really matter, but I always want to give credit where it's due. So anything
Would
that
the
lengthens...
exhale be nose or mouth for the 8 seconds, or could you start with mouth if it was too challenging to exhale?
Yeah, you could. I mean, generally speaking, I would encourage people to use their nose.
Okay.
Because it is a slow exhale, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. If you're rapidly breathing, right, remember the nose is designed to slow down and pressurize the air. So it's always you're always going to feel more resistance breathing through your nose. You should feel more resistance breathing through your nose. In fact, there's something called empty nose syndrome, where people have their turbinates shaved down, and now the air doesn't slow down, and it's actually jarring. So we want the air to slow down, and especially when we're breathing slow, we want to breathe in and out through our nose, especially because when we keep our tongue at the roof of our mouth, it relaxes and soothes our nervous system. So think of a child, when they suck their thumb, they push the roof of their mouth. When they latch onto the mother's breast, the nipple hits the roof of the mouth. When they put their pacifier in their mouth, it hits the roof of the mouth. And so that relaxes us. So 4-7-8 breath, I would encourage to breathe in through the nose, hold, and then breathe out through the nose in a slow fashion. Another breathing technique that you can use to shift into a more relaxed state. So if you're feeling a lot of stress or tension, or maybe you had a stressful phone call or a stressful day at the office or at home and you don't want to bring it somewhere else with you, or maybe your client, if you're working with a client, has had a stressful day, it's a good way to wind down or get them to relax. It's called a physiologic sigh. And so that's a really simple breathing technique where we breathe in through our nose, take another sip of air, hold, tongue at the roof of the mouth, and just holding for about a count of 5 to 8. And then when we exhale, we drop our tongue and we sigh audibly. So it would be just letting it all the way out and repeating that, 4 to 10 times, depending on what you need. And that's going to shift us again, because we're lengthening the exhale. It's going to shift us into a more parasympathetic state. It's one of the fastest ways to kind of regulate somebody's nervous system. And then
that's the one I'm taking back to school right away.
Yeah.
I work with small groups of kids, and I get some of these kids right after certain activities, and they're just bouncing off the wall. And I only have a short time with each group. And so I'm taking that back Monday. I'm so excited.
Yeah, so it's all the way out. And then if you so those are 3, and there's like unlimited different breathing techniques I could share with you, but those are 3 that you can start with. And in terms of cooling your breath, you could the way the dog cools themselves down is they breathe with their mouth open with their tongue hanging out of their mouth, right? That's a way to cool your breath or cool cool your body temperature if you needed to. That's why when we are running or when we're exercising profusely, we're breathing in and out through our mouth because it's going to cool us from the inside. If you wanted to heat your body temperature, your core temperature, you can do something called a ujjayi breath. So imagine, breathing, but as you exhale, keeping your tongue at the roof of your mouth is closed, pretending like you're fogging a mirror with your mouth closed. You're exhaling through your nose, but you're just tightening your glottis a little bit so that you're pretending like you're fogging a mirror, but you're just slowing down the air. You're creating this internal friction with the air as you're exhaling, which increases your core temperature. So that's another technique that you can use. Is called ujjayi or victory breath.
I love this. Well, you've been so generous. This is amazing. Had amazing guests after amazing that we learn from, and we're hoping if we're learning amazing things, our audience is as well. Before you go, I often tell my clients to major in the majors. And when I'm making suggestions, they're huge levers or return on investments. And you have made the case beyond reasonableness in any court in the world. You've made the case for breathing. Are there other simple things such as in the morning, we ground, I sun gaze? I know that I've heard that's an Indian practice, and I'm not telling anyone else. Research, research, research. I don't have seed oils. For my eyes, sun gazing is great. Walking, breathing, some other simple things that you found are these huge levers and your practitioners have found that are really simple that we can look to in our daily lives. Journaling, gratitude practices, all that, yeah.
Yeah, I
Your
mean,
top two.
definitely echo everything that you're saying. I like to make health passive where possible.
Hmm.
So I live in Toronto or close to Toronto, so it's cold now here and cloudy. So you might notice a slight, redness to my face. It's because I have an infrared lamp on. And when we're indoors, we don't get any infrared or UV light. So, making sure that people are regulating their lighting conditions is very important. And I also encourage people to get the right types of light bulbs in their home installed and turn off overhead lighting at night
Mm.
and only use red bulbs in the evening. I also have a grounding mat on my desk that kind of keeps me grounded
Hmm.
while I'm sitting here. And then I would say that spending more time in nature, we are outdoor plants that got planted indoors. And so many of us are like trying to negotiate with nature and bargain with our biology. And so I would say the more time we can spend outdoors, especially in nature, because what you'll notice in nature is that, you look at everything in my room here, it's all straight, right? So nature does not create straight lines. It only creates, fractal self-similar patterns. And these fractal self-similar patterns are actually very soothing and healing to the nervous system. So staring at clouds, which are self-similar, going for a walk in the woods, the trees are self-similar, the branches are self-similar, the staring at grass or bushes, that's all self-similar, waves, sand dunes, they're all self-similar repeating patterns. And this is why we feel so calm in those type of environments versus when we're in environments where everything is straight and flat, that's actually very jarring to our nervous system. So
Wow.
you can bring the outdoors indoors, have more plants, and things like that in your home, but just go outside, right? Spend as much time outdoors as you can. In the summer, I have my office set up outdoors. So I'm outdoors pretty much 8-9 hours a day or every working hour. And I do all my work out there. In the winter, I bring things indoors. So I bring the infrared light in. I have a UV light that I use. I bring that in. I use my grounding mat, right? And then of course, after this, I'm going to go for a nice walk and spend some time outdoors. And so just really, regulating circadian and biology would be just one more thing I would add to what you shared and spending time in nature.
Thank you so much for this. If our listeners
Yep.
want to find you and find out more about what you do, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. They can if they want more tools on breathing and breath work, they can go to Breathwork with Sachin. And if they want to learn more about our metabolic programs and how we help people with, just really turning on all their internal switches for health, similar to what you guys might be doing, then we have a program called the Living Light Metabolic Reset, and they can go to becomeproof.com and learn more, or they can go to mymetabolicreset.ca to learn more about that program.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time. And truly, I can't wait to take this back to my school, and I will update you. I'm really excited.
My pleasure. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.